Welcome back to the Behind the Scenes, the podcast where we break down the real engineering behind the Web3, minus the hype. So today we're asking a big question. Why does Web3 still feel like a beta test, even after all the time? And I'm joined again by Anit Chakraborthy, CTO of Altius Labs. And if you are a Web2 engineer thinking of jumping into Web3, who knows who's watching us, this one is for you for sure. And generally, we are trying to debate today on many things, which I hope will be interesting to touch point to anyone, regardless whether you are already building in Web3 or just taking part as a crypto enthusiast. So let's get into it. And we have 15 minutes to cover this section today. So Anit, let's start with the transition itself. If you onboarded lots of engineers from Web 2 to Web 3, what tends to surprise or trip them up the most? Maybe you can cover that part a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's there's kind of an inherent understanding or inherent view of the world, right? Of where you come from in Web 2, which is actually very different than where we kind of came from in high frequency trading. But yeah, I feel like, especially like if we're talking about Web 2, if we're talking about massively scaled websites, they definitely solve very difficult problems. But if you are developing on one side of it, for example, you're developing like a web page or whatever it is, a web app, I guess, and that is relying on something in the back to actually give you back data, and then you can fill the data onto the page. A lot of the developers are actually used to this this abstraction, and one thing that happens with the abstraction is you forget what's happening on the other side. So one thing in high frequency trading is you have to kind of monitor what's happening on every side, from the front to the end and all the way back, right? There's literally a thing we used to call tick to trade, right? So the second the market moves, how fast can you place a trade, right? And that's kind of the whole round trip from one end to the other that you have to optimize every little bit. And so yeah, I think a lot of Web 2 developers, they end up in this mode where they're like, oh, I'm just calling this web service and it's just going to give me back data, no problem, not thinking about what's happening behind that web service. And so that's not really a thing, right? in Web 3, right? There are RPC calls you can make if you're like trying to pull data from some of the large RPC providers, but if you're working on infrastructure, there is no such thing. There's consensus, that is could be done globally. You kind of have no idea of what's going to happen on the other end, right? And that's kind of the whole point of a decentralized ledger, is because there are going to be nodes that fail, and you can't just always count on that. Versus, and again, I'm not saying that these are engineers that are bad in any way, right? They've optimized themselves to do their job well, which is I hope to do the same thing here, right? But they are relying on certain services that just kind of magically can give them very sub-second responses of what they're querying, and to that end, like it's an older environment, so you also end up with this. You have fantastic tools, right? You have all kinds of crazy tools to develop. Usually, you're using if you're writing in whatever language it is, Go or Python or even C++, like all the profilers, everything is available. Versus if you're writing a smart contract in Solidity, much less, right? It's a much smaller group of people that are working on it. We'll get there eventually, but right now we're still in earlier stages compared to Web 2, which has been around since the 90s, right? So I guess technically not the 90s, but shortly after the 90s is what was actually considered Web 2, but it's been around for a while is the point.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so the conclusion is that it's not just about learning Solidity; it's unlearning assumptions about how the seamstress behaves, and there is way much more to cover. Thank you. One which popped in my mind was like there is this persistent idea in Web 2 that smart contracts are just APIs on blockchain, and but we both know that couldn't be further from the truth. So can you break down what that mindset misses?
Yeah, I think So in Web 2, there's a lot of stuff that just if your part of the system fails, there's a lot of things that can kind of come in and clean up. Or for example, if your node fails or something, you can just quickly they'll redirect to another node, or it's totally fine. Maybe the user will see a hiccup. But usually you just throw up a little error and say, "Hey, reload your page," and we've gotten used to that, right? We just expect that, and it's fine. We don't have a problem with that. Um, and so that is very different, right? In the blockchain, everything has to be very for everyone to trust the system. Every transition has to be very precise. So if a smart contract is executed, it has to execute the exact same way everywhere in the entire globe, right? Anyone that's running any part of the system of your chain has to have that experience for everyone to trust each other. And that's very different, right? And then in addition to that, like if, for example, like say something messes up in the Web 2 world, you could potentially revert it. If I'm Google or Facebook and I'm not saying they're doing a fantastic job of providing these tools that we use every day, billions of people around the world. But if something bad happens on the back end, they could just change it, right? They could just reverse what they did, and you wouldn't even know. And but it's fine. Your Gmail still works, whatever it is, whatever application you're using, and that's not a thing, right? In blockchain, people's currencies, people's savings. Sometimes their livelihoods are on the blockchain, and if someone could just magically reverse something, then that's not great, right? It's a big problem.
That would cause lots of drama and FUD on crypto Twitter for sure.
Yes, yes. I mean, even the U.S. Equities markets, they have a system, like a system in place to be able to reverse trades. And at the end of the day, like the rules are a little bit fuzzy, right? Sometimes they get whoever the losing person is on a trade that got reversed, right? They're not happy, and sometimes there was feelings that they may lean toward a certain bigger player versus a smaller player, or whatever it is, right? A human is doing that, and so you end up with people unhappy because the system didn't work how you thought it would work, and we can't afford that in Web3.
I see. Last but not the least, I'm wondering whether we can touch quickly on the point what Web3 can learn from like the real infra from Web2. So Web3 people love to say it's like rebuilding the internet. But right now it often feels like we are stuck rebuilding the 20-year-old version of it sometimes. So what, according to your humble opinion, this space can learn from enterprise scale systems, the kind of infra that's quietly powering the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because in my opinion, at least, as an old man, I already mentioned something about the '90s. So the era I've started in, at least. Um, at the end of the day, like we've been solving the same problems kind of over and over for every 5 years or 8 years, whatever the cycle is of the new kind of internet changing technology that becomes a normal part of our lives. Um, and it ends up being a lot of the same problems. It's how do you grow your cache? How do you scale horizontally? How do you work on these distributed systems problems have just been very similar. Before it was spinning disks, right? You had these super slow hard drives. How do you work with those to be able to still serve content quickly? Think about like the old like web servers. The web, again in the early 2000s or whatever, like often you would hit a page and you would be totally fine to wait 5-10 seconds. Obviously that is not okay now. If you hit Amazon, everything is going to be pretty fast, and occasionally someone, as I mentioned earlier, will have hit an error on the back end you don't even know, and everything is just rerouted magically in the back end, and they control everything, which makes it a lot easier, which we don't in Web3 because we're decentralized. But at the end of the day, it's all the same, a lot of the same problems, right? We just have to apply these concepts to what we're trying to build now. Some of them, people hate me for saying it maybe, but like maybe Web3 never gets as fast as Web2. But if the acceptable UI UX is, if the UI UX is acceptable to, you're close to the speed of Amazon's webpage, then for the kind of trust that we're getting from this decentralized world, the promise of that to make it part of everyone's lives, that's probably a reasonable trade-off. The 1 or 2 seconds that it might be slower. So I'm not saying it's going to be way slower. I'm saying it's easier to do things in a centralized fashion. That's just the laws of the laws of complexity in physics. Just tell us that. So, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, we just try to make those little things happen again in this world, and it doesn't have to be all about. What I'm saying is the infrastructure from that makes Amazon's back end so fast. Just those same principles need to apply here.
That's a bold take. Let's say to Web3 builders, one hard truth, something they might not want to hear, but need to. Do you have any idea what would it be?
That's a good one. Well, I think it gets. I may have slightly answered this question when you asked me the first question. I think it's you should never think what the previous set of problems that people solved. Actually, this kind of gets into all the questions that we were talking about. Are old. I remember chatting with some people at lunch at one of my previous jobs, and we mentioned learning something and saying how blah blah blah, we had no internet and we had to learn something, right, and we had to use books to do it. And this person was like, what, almost like, what's a book? He's much younger than me. But he ended up becoming a really good engineer that I work with. And I think the reason was because he had appreciation of some of the work that had been done before. We're not, the older generation or whatever, we're not always right. But there are some things that we have learned. There's something that we have learned. I mean, it's always a constant, everyone should be constantly learning. You can't just disregard things that have happened in the past, I think. So I think that's the main thing, is that, this is, we like to think of it as a new frontier, but we still haven't, technically delivered, right, to the world. I still can't easily use my any crypto wallet as fast as I can use a Visa card. So I don't know, until we're there, we clearly have things to learn from other engineering systems that have been built.
I see. Yeah, that's fine. I think that pretty much covers and satisfies our viewers, I hope. Sometimes my takeaway is that the hardest part isn't ZK proofs or state trees. It's making something people can trust and developers can actually use. So guys, Web3 still feels like a beta test, but that's not a failure. It's just a phase. And if we get to the fundamentals right now, we have a shot at building something that lasts. So I hope at Altius, we are not chasing the hype. We are designing systems that actually scale for real use by real teams. And I hope that this session was kind of helpful to you. As promised, 15 minutes still didn't last. So we keep going and we'll be sharing with you these sessions on a weekly basis. Please follow us at Altius Labs for more from the frontier of the execution infrastructure. And if you are an engineer who likes solving the problems that don't have Stack Overflow answers yet, hit us up and catch you in the next one.